We all know that parasites are a health issue for our captive reptiles, but few of us have a microscope or would know what to do with one if we had one. Well, I'm going to give you a bare bones, high-level introduction to fighting parasites that requires no previous knowledge. In fact, you're going to be highly effective in fighting these parasites, even if you don't know that they are there yet. My name is Bill Strand. This is the Chameleon Academy. Let's get to this. So what is this magic that I have? Obviously no magic at all. It's a simple understanding of the basic parasitic life cycle and how certain things that you can do in your husbandry will break that life cycle. And so I'm going to give you that basic knowledge. So by the end of this video, you're going to be able to know what things you can do in your husbandry that will make it very difficult for those parasites to complete their life cycle. Before we start, I'd like to introduce you to some basic terms. Now, I'm going to use the most basic of terms because I don't want to get into the science of parasites. We're going to keep this high level. But these are the terms that I will use. The first is nematode, and that's a word for a parasitic worm. The eggs, or what the nematode produces to reproduce, is called ova, same as the eggs. The other one is coccidia. And coccidia is a protozoan parasite, and they reproduce using oocysts. That's what comes out of the reptile. The parasites we are mostly concerned about have a direct life cycle. What this means is that the adult, the reproducing form that's inside of our reptile produces some sort of infectious material, whether it's eggs, oocysts, or whatnot, that is jettisoned out the reptile in the feces. Once these eggs and such are outside of the reptile, then they have to find their way back into the mouth of another reptile of the same type, because these parasites are very specific in who they can have as a host. Some are more specific than others. And so in this very simple life cycle, we have 3 attack points. The first is the reproductive form that's inside our reptile. So we eliminate the adult parasites. The second is all of those eggs and oocysts that are in the feces. So we remove the infectious material. And the third is, well, they have to get back to our reptile's mouth, so we disrupt the return path. Let's go over each one of these. Our first step is to eliminate the adult forms that are reproducing inside of our reptile. Now, you might be surprised to learn that our greatest tool, weapon against these parasites is the reptile's immune system. That immune system does not like these little beasties inside and will mercilessly cut them down if it finds them. And so our number one weapon against these parasites is a strong immune system. And the reason why this is great is because that is in our control. An immune system is strengthened when they get top level husbandry. And this isn't a surprise. It's the same with us human beings. When we exercise, when we eat nutritious food, when we drink enough water, when we sleep 8 hours a night, when we do all the things that our mother told us to do, our body is strong. And when our body is strong, our immune system is strong. Now, we also need emotional health as well. Do you notice how when you're overly stressed, you get sick easier? Well, that's because our mental state, our emotional state affects our physical health, and that affects the strength of our immune system. And it's the same with our reptiles. They need the proper husbandry, meaning temperatures, humidities, hydration, nutrition, but they also need to be emotionally strong, meaning get rid of the cohabitation stress, give them enough room to move around, make sure they feel secure in their environment. You can do the environmental parameters all right, but if your reptile doesn't feel secure in its enclosure, the immune system will be compromised and it won't be effective on parasites or bacteria. So it's husbandry that is the secret to keeping a strong reptile. So what happens when the immune system is compromised or weakened? And that's when we get these infections that spiral out of control, whether it's parasitic or it could be bacterial. The medication comes down and knocks down the parasites, knocks down the bacteria, and it gives the immune system a chance to recover and take over once the medication has done its job. So the medication just gives your immune system a chance to bounce back, but during that time, you better figure out what the husbandry issue is that caused this in the first place, or else the infection will just come back. At least with parasites, Once we eliminate them, we need a reintroduction to get them back. With bacteria, it's around all the time, every time your reptile breathes. But that's for another episode. Next, we want to remove the infectious material. And what this means is essentially cleaning your cage. And when we're talking about parasites, cleaning the cage means cleaning anything the poop touched. If you're keeping something like a chameleon that's high up in the cage and poops down, then it's anything that poop touched on the way down to the bottom of the cage. If you have a bearded dragon or leopard gecko or some other terrestrial lizard, then it's whatever soil or substrate you have on the bottom that is anywhere near the poop. Now, this does get to be a little bit interesting because when the poop goes down, if it's dropped from a high level, there's splashage that happens. If the poop is in a terrestrial cage, the bearded dragon may have walked through it or swished it with its tail and spread some of that material. And so it's very difficult to be 100% on the cleaning of the poop. But you can do your best. You can get as much as possible. And really, any of these things that I'm talking about, we can't do it 100%. But if we do the best we can on all three of these points, we drastically reduce the chances that the parasite has to continue this life cycle. Now, if you have a cage that has a plain floor, like a plastic floor, say in the case of the chameleon, I go in with a paper towel. I pick up as much of the poop as possible. I go in with a disinfectant. I use accelerated hydrogen peroxide. You use the disinfectant of your choice. I clean the area and then I go back and I wipe everything back up to be as thorough as possible. What I am doing is removing as much infectious material as possible. Now, those of you who are familiar with coccidia will say, yeah, but you can't kill those oocysts. They're very difficult to kill. And that is true, but I don't have to kill them if I can remove them. So remember, we can't kill them, but we can put them down the sewer. Now, the third point of control that we have is to disrupt the return path. And that means controlling what goes into your reptile's mouth. Theoretically speaking, the floor could be covered with oocysts and ova and parasitic material, but if it never gets into the chameleon's mouth, they will eventually die. Of course, coccidia will take over a year to die, but what I'm saying is if it doesn't get into your pet's mouth, it's not going to continue the life cycle. The life cycle is going to be broken. And so you figure out, depending upon what kind of reptile you have and how it eats, how to control what goes in its mouth. If you can hand feed or tongue feed, that's perfect. If your reptile eats out of a food dish, well, put the food dish in there and supervise it. And keep it in there for as long as it takes for your reptile to eat, maybe 30 minutes, whatever it takes, but don't leave it unsupervised. And if anything jumps out or gets out of the food dish, grab it and take it away and make sure that it doesn't get into the mouth of your reptile. Crickets are the hardest one to control, so if you feed your reptile crickets, careful with that because they jump out of the food dish, and boy, reptiles love to see that movement, so a cricket jumps to the floor of the cage, runs around all of that horrible poop stuff on the bottom, and then the reptile zaps that cricket and gets a whole dose of parasites. And so if any food item hits the bottom of the cage, get a paper towel, pick it up, throw it away, make sure it never gets to your reptile. And then wash your hands. Our hands are the things that go from one cage to another. And so it's our hands that are transporting the ova, the oocysts. And if you do something inside of the cage and somehow you get some material on your hands, you go out, you close the cage, and then you go wash your hands. And then you go out, you get the food, you come back to feed your lizard. But what do? You use your clean hands and you unlatch the cage with the same latch that your dirty hands closed. And so by this manner, no matter how much we wash our hands, it really is important what we touched when our hands were dirty. Watch every surface that you touch when you've cleaned the cage and you're bringing your hands out. Let's talk about how parasites spread in the reptile community. Now, it seems like we all live so far apart. How can something microscopic get from somebody's house to another person's house? You would think that if you have just one captive bred reptile that is pretty safe from getting parasites. They don't just spontaneously erupt. Well, the thing is that parasites have learned how to get themselves around. They've evolved to be able to get from mouth to mouth in a vast forest. Take the example of a chameleon in Madagascar sitting up in the treetop, and it poops. That poop with the infectious material, the oocysts, goes all the way down 50 feet to the forest floor. Well, the parasites have figured out how to get from that poop down on the forest floor back into the mouth of another chameleon 50 feet up in a tree. And they have a number of ways of hitching rides with insects, rats, or whatever the food item of the reptile we're talking about. And so it's actually not that difficult for these parasites to make their way within our reptile community. Have you ever been in a reptile shop? Have you ever been to a reptile expo? Have you ever met up with someone who has been to a reptile shop or a reptile expo? These places have reptiles, especially wild-caught reptiles, and therefore they have parasitic material. And anything that they have touched could have oocysts or ova on it. And all they have to do is touch something that now you touch, and you don't even have to shake their hand, and you are taking back infectious material. And to illustrate how easy this is, let's just take a reptile expo. You don't even have to have your reptile at this point. You're just going to window shop. So say you go to the expo and you just look at things. You don't even touch anything, but you go to the bathroom. Simple enough. The thing is, if someone who did have a wild-caught reptile goes to the same bathroom and uses the door before you, and you touch the same spot on the door, well, that's a transfer of infectious material. Now, let's not get too concerned. It's not going to infect you, but it's still oocysts and ova. But you say, but Bill, I wash my hands. Yes, but are you washing your hands on those turn faucets where you turn the faucet off with your clean hands in the exact same spot that you turned it on with your dirty hands? That's a transfer of ova and oocysts. And the thing is, like coccidia, those oocysts can persist in the environment for over a year. And so you literally could go to a reptile expo, not touch any reptiles, and bring back coccidia oocysts that are going to be sitting in your home. And if you get a reptile 6 months later, you could conceivably transfer those oocysts to your new reptile and infect it. And if this revelation totally disrupts how excited you are to go to reptile shows, yeah, it's just a fact of nature. It's what we have to deal with. And I think the healthiest thing to do is not to be scared of parasites, but just realize that parasites are there. They will be there with reptiles all the time. And it's our job to just look at parasites as a maintenance function of our reptiles. Even if you have just one captive hatched reptile, do an annual fecal check, just to see what's there. There are so many ways that any of this parasitic material can get to you, even if you just have one animal. And if you hear from your vet that your pet has parasites, don't panic. Get your medication, treat your reptile, evaluate your husbandry to see if you need to do anything different, and then go on with life. In this video, I've specifically stayed away from identifying specific parasites and going into the intricate life cycles, but it's incredibly fascinating. If you've got the time, I absolutely recommend diving into it. It is so fascinating seeing this world under the microscope and realizing it's just as complex as the one we see. Now, in a way, I'm anticipating that some experienced people will look at this video and say, Bill, you're oversimplifying things by saying that concentrating on husbandry can be so effective. You need to have the medicines, you need to have the microscope, you need to have the fecal analysis through your vet and such like that. And to some extent, they're right. But in this episode, I'm not saying you don't have to learn all of that. What I'm saying is it takes a long time to learn all of that. And so while you're going through that process, these are some steps that you can take right here, right now, without knowing all of that will be effective. Now, ironically, one of the worst parasites we have to deal with, Cryptosporidium, we don't have any medication that attacks it. The only thing that we have that can attack Cryptosporidium is the reptile's immune system, which means that all of the husbandry that we've been talking about is the most effective fight against Cryptosporidium that we have. We literally don't have medications that's going to help us. Now, the reason why this very annoying parasite is so powerful is because it is one of the few that auto-infects. The thin-walled oocyst is designed to open up within the host that it originated and continue the infection. And that is what makes it so difficult. We absolutely have to work with husbandry because we have to strengthen that immune system. That's the only thing keeping this infection down. Let's talk crickets and pinworms. Now, when somebody gets the unexpected news from their veterinarian that there's pinworms and they're trying to figure out how in the world did my reptile get pinworms? One thing that's been bouncing around our community a lot has been, I got pinworms from the commercial cricket breeding farm. I know we hate to admit it, but it's more likely that we picked up pinworm ova by going to a reptile store or a reptile expo than we got it from crickets coming into our house. But we have to explore every possibility. Now, this has been bouncing around the community long enough that a scientist actually did a peer-reviewed study where he took a whole bunch of crickets from a bunch of different cricket breeding farms and tested them for pinworms. They're also called oxyurids. Well, the result of the study was, no, these oxyurids, pinworms, are not coming in with the crickets. I'm going to be linking to the study down in the description, and so if you want to read it yourself, you can go there. Now, is this the definitive that parasites never come in with any feeders? No, it's not definitive. But before we start crediting the feeders with bringing in parasites, we need to do a little bit more research and study, at least to the level that this scientist did, to say, no, it's not happening. And the reason why it's important that we truly identify where these parasites are coming from is because if we do the convenient thing and blame these cricket breeding farms, then we're not addressing where the parasites actually are coming from, and that will keep on happening. So, as far as we can tell right now, through the studies that we have available to us, the whole oxyurid pinworms coming in with crickets is an urban legend until further notice. All right, so what are the next steps? Basically, it's to evaluate your husbandry with this parasitic life cycle in mind. If we consider those 3 attack points, we can adjust our husbandry. For example, the first part, the adult parasite forms that are producing infectious material inside your reptile. What can we do about that? Well, there's that annual fecal that I recommended. You can do it once a year, twice a year, but do it on a regular basis to where your vet checks the poop for any infectious material that may be present. And even if you have just one reptile, we went over, there's all sorts of ways that parasitic material can find its way to the right host. And so by doing a regular fecal check, you can make sure that you nip it in the bud. If just a little bit gets in, you can stop it with the right medication before it gets out of hand. And there was that husbandry aspect, keeping the immune system strong. And so evaluate the care guides for your particular species. Think about, how can I make it better? Instead of going for the minimum, get a bigger cage. The better the husbandry for your reptile, the stronger their immune system is going to be. And so husbandry is going to be a huge part of this entire success story. Second of all, take a look at your spot cleaning regimen. How do you pick up the poop? How carefully do you make sure you get everything that the poop touched? Do you disinfect the area? Now, I know that in some instances, this is difficult. Like if you have a bioactive situation or it's a turtle and you've got water there. So every single reptile is going to have its unique challenges. The best thing to do is consult the experts in that particular community and say, what do you do? There will be best practices, and go ahead and be obsessive about it. The more thorough you are up front, the more likely you're going to be able to nip a problem in the bud before it becomes an issue. And you may even nip it in the bud before you even know that there's a problem. And of course, that's what we're going for. And finally, evaluate your feeding. I know it's very easy just to throw a bunch of crickets into the cage with your reptile, but that is playing into the hands of the parasites. So as inconvenient as it is, start figuring out a certain husbandry regimen for your feeding time that will avoid insects being able to get anywhere near in contact with anything that has touched the poop. Now, we did all this with no knowledge of parasites, no microscopes anywhere. So this is the very basic. You can do all of these husbandry things without knowing anything more. And the way to be extra effective, and yeah, we want to be the best we can be, is to learn more about parasites. And to that end, I have the digital course, Hunting Microscopic Chameleon Parasites. Yes, it's got chameleon in the name because that's my specialty, but all of this parasite information applies to every other reptile and amphibian. We talk about the other parasitic life cycle. We talk about microscopes. How do you know which one to buy? What equipment do you need? And how do you use it? Once you get it set up, how do you prepare the fecal tests? And how do you search for parasites? We talk about parasitic IDs and learning about each one of the parasites. We talk about the medications you can use. Then we talk about husbandry, quarantine, and how to be an effective partner with your veterinarian. This course is going to get you familiar and comfortable with managing the parasitic risks in your reptile husbandry. But what's most special about this course is it's not just a digital course. Yes, it's an asynchronous course. You can take it whenever you want to, and you can take as long as you want to go through it. But it's community powered, which means that with every lesson, there's a comment section where if you type in a question, I'm going to answer it. And there's a discussion group that you can be part of with other students, the alumni who've already gone through the class, and me. And what we do in that group is we do case studies. We talk about what each other is seeing in the poop. We're helping each other through it. And so the advantage to you is that you are seeing how we apply what you are learning in the course. You are able to ask questions of the people who have already gone through the course, and you're able to be part of the analysis whenever somebody puts up a picture of what they've seen. I have structured this course to give you the best chance possible to manage the parasitic risks to your reptiles. And so please come join us. The course is $80 and it resides on a professional course community platform. You can learn more at the link in the description. And now I want to thank you for joining me in this educational outreach. Part of the fun in learning myself is to bring you along with me because I take pride in your success. If you like the style of this video and you would like to learn more about what we are doing with arboreal reptiles in the Chameleon Academy, you can sign up for the weekly email newsletter or join one of the 2 live sessions that we have every week. The information is in the description below. And with that, this is Bill Strand signing off. I'll see you next time.